So today we're going to take a look at the meta by the stats because I was inspired by a post on Reddit from the Valorant competitive subreddit of someone, showing the numbers of pre 4.04 and post 4.04, and they were separated into EMEA and NA, so I thought I'd take the time to combine them and kind of create an overall meta picture of kind of the tier 1 matches, and this is what we came out with, and it's definitely quite interesting. So we're going to go through each of the 4 classes first and just talk about them in general, and then we will go into each map and talk about the most popular agents on each map and how that has changed as well. And so let's begin with the controllers, and I'm sure that this is no surprise to many of you that obviously the controllers have changed a lot because they were the ones that got changed the most. And so again, it kind of follows as you would expect. Astra got nerfed pretty hard. She is getting a lot less pick because of that. And then you've got Brim and Omen, who got buffed, and with the Astra nerf as well are seeing a lot more pick rate. And then Viper also got her nerf as well and is seeing less pick rate as a reflection of that as well. But I think on the whole, looking at these numbers for the post 4.04 meta picture, this kind of shows that Riot has done a pretty good job. Maybe Astra needs like a slight buff in terms of like maybe her cooldowns could be a little bit less than they currently are. But other than that, pretty good job by the Riot devs creating a somewhat balanced meta. I will say about this post 4.04, we still have a relatively small sample size in terms of, it's only the week 5 of NA plus their playoffs, and then obviously it's only the playoffs of the EMEA games. So, there isn't too many teams being represented in this, and there isn't too many games either as a whole still, but, I tried my best to try and make it as big a sample size as I could, but this is what we've got. But you can see pretty good effort by the Riot devs, and as we move forward onto the Sentinel meta here, you can see that we had a pretty balanced, I would say, Sentinel meta, and what we've seen instead now is a bit of a rise of Chamber and decline of Cypher. This, I think, can be explained by the fact that there are more NA games in this sample size than EMEA games, and as we know, NA loves Chamber. There are plenty of Jets in NA that cannot play Raze, so they play Chamber on maps where Raze is good. There's plenty of that going on, and I think that explains this quite a bit. And obviously, EMEA perhaps like Cypher a bit more than they do Chamber, or at least it's more balanced than it is in NA, and so with less EMEA games, I think that's why we have seen a bit of a reduction of Cypher as a whole, but I think over a bigger sample size, maybe that this will balance back out to kind of maybe where it was before, maybe with Chamber being a bit higher than this 31%, but overall I think it will balance out a bit more. Killjoy still fine, and Sage we have seen a slight increase. Obviously Sage is kind of in a separate kind of world to these three, where if you're playing Sage, you're probably still maybe playing one of these other three anyway, because she's kind of in a different role. So this 4% increase for Sage is kind of just a reflection of where the meta has gone. There's a couple agents that kind of show this, particularly with the Initiators, in that Sage and this kind of faster paced meta, she suits it better, both in terms of slowing that down and then also, getting that wall up, getting that plant down and playing post plant, very quickly. I think that Sage just kind of fits this meta a bit better than she did before, and that is kind of being shown here with the numbers, and we can probably expect more of Sage, even though she has seen a decline on, her map of Icebox. She's actually seeing more pick rate overall, which is probably a good thing for Sage. Duelist meta, this one obviously I'm sure many of you could predict wasn't going to look too great, and it doesn't. You might be a bit surprised that this Jet number coming down pretty heavily. Again, this is to do with perhaps some of the maps that were picked more so, like Split and Bind we had quite a lot of in the playoffs, and so you get less Jet on those maps, so that's kind of partly responsible. But there is a bit of a switch as well, which explains some of this Raze higher pick rate as well. That teams, it seems, have decided that on those maps where Jet isn't great, you need to pick Raze. Whereas before they were, some teams were still like, no, we can make Jet work. Now it seems that teams have gone, no, pick Raze, and you'll see that in some of the map statistics, with Raze going to like 100% on certain maps where she wasn't before. So it seems like that is where some of the pick rate has come from, and other parts of it are just like the maps that were picked more perhaps weren't always Jet maps, and so that's kind of where this reduction comes from. We saw a bit more Neon, obviously, with the mech comp on Split, and some on Haven as well, so maybe we'll see more and more Neon as we go forward, and obviously as people get more used to the agent as a whole. These three, though, we don't need to talk about. And Riot, probably needs to try and fix something there. Initiator meta. This one is very, very interesting, of course, because Sova was dominant, completely dominant, and has seen a pretty big reduction despite, no changes to any of these actual agents. He has seen a pretty big reduction, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But KO relatively same, and Sky relatively the same. These two are kind of, you pick one or the other, so I guess that this kind of 3% is kind of taken from this 2% of Sky. But Breach has come in for Sova in a big way, as you can see, a 12% increase there. And again, it comes down to what the meta has shifted into. That slower kind of informational meta, perhaps, that Sova was a part of before, isn't as necessary as much now. And if we're going for full executes, which a lot of teams are trying, then Breach perhaps is a bit better, because he's better at stopping those fast executes as well with his stun, but also can be a very big part of those executes as well. Obviously his whole kit is kind of designed for that. So Breach coming in pretty big there. And again, this will be a bit of a map thing, as I mentioned. More split will mean more Breach than Sova, and things like that, more fracture and whatnot, would mean more Breach, although there wasn't a lot of fracture. So we have just seen an increase in Breach a lot as a whole. But now let's come to the maps, and we'll start with Ascent. We'll go alphabetically, and well, Ascent, pretty boring map, my least favorite map if I'm being honest. Was pretty much, this was like a comp that you would see pretty much every team run, and I think had we been in the same meta for a while, this KO number, as people kind of figured out KO was really good, probably would have approached the 90s as well, I would have suspected, given enough time. So yeah, this was pretty standard for most teams to actually run this exact comp. Whereas now we still obviously have, a pretty good idea of these four are going to be on, the same four that were there before, because nothing's changed in that regard. But the controller has gone from Astra 100%, and now the most picked is Omen at 47. And we've seen both Omen, Brim, and Astra all picked on this map. I think Brim is like 30-something%, and Astra about 15 to 20%. So a real mix of controllers here that you can go with. And that's really, nice to see overall. I mean, maybe there could be something done about this. Maybe if the Duelists were a bit more balanced, maybe, with the addition of the new Initiator, maybe they will take part of Sova's crown on this map. We'll have to see. But, definitely an interesting decision in terms of the controllers, but nothing else really has changed. On Bind, we have seen a bit more of a shift. Here's one where Raze, as you can see, has gone from like 83 to that 100%. Teams not going with that Jet anymore. They've realized Raze is better. Pick Raze. But at Bind, had 4 agents that we were pretty confident of here. And then a bit of a mix, as you can see, Sky down on 44%. But now a lot has changed, right? Astra has gone for Brim, pretty much guaranteed. The Viper is still there for most teams, but some teams are running solo Brim. Sky has become even more picked, and then we have Sage as our last pick as well. And this, you might notice, is the Ascend comp. This is the comp that they were running beforehand, even on pre 4.04, and had a lot of success with. And now it seems that most teams have kind of agreed with them that this is kind of the best comp, although we do still see, some Sova for Sage. You can see Sova's had a massive drop here on this map, as it has become, more of a fast-paced kind of event, with Brim coming in instead of the Astra, and Sage coming in. But some teams are still holding on to Sova. And then we come to Breeze, and there's no real shock with these first 3, and then KO has also seen just an increase in play rate here, which again probably isn't too surprising, with K is just good. But then this one was actually a surprise to me, because as I mentioned, there are more NA games on this than there are EMEA games. We're actually seeing more Cypher. Now I'm not sure if that's just those particular NA teams that were playing this map and picking this map, like Cypher, perhaps. Maybe that's what it was. But yeah, I was a bit surprised. I mean, Chamber isn't too far away from Cypher on this, but yeah, I was a bit surprised to see more Cypher than Chamber on Breeze, but I think it'll be close overall between the two in terms of the pick rate. Breeze, again, pretty standard map. It's going to be these 4, maybe Sky for KO, and then one of these 2 Sentinels. And then we come to Fracture, and this one was a bit more all over the place. Obviously, Breach in there 100%, and again, here's another one where Raze has gone from 77 to 100%. But then we did have, some disagreements. Some teams stuck with Astra, but most went with Brim. As you can see, Astra has pretty much been replaced by Brim. Big decline for Viper on Fracture. Chamber, this one is kind of really interesting here, because Chamber, for this 71%, it's 100% pick rate for Chamber on NA and 0% for EMEA, where EMEA have always gone with Cypher and NA have always gone with Chamber. I personally prefer Cypher, if I'm being honest, and it's not just because I'm from EMEA, but we have seen some pretty big punishes for picking Chamber. I can think of that Sage Wall on the flank, you know, going with a Sage Wall there for V1. That was a pretty big punish in that game for picking Chamber instead of a Cypher, and I do think, personally, I think Cypher is just a bit better. And then Sage is our final pick, and this final pick was really quite split between quite a few things, but Sage came out on top. Again, there was some Viper in there. There was quite a few different agents with, you know, small pick rates. Jett was one of them. But Sage overall coming out on top with a 50% pick rate. And now we come to Haven, and this is probably the map that has changed the most, I want to say, because, well, Astra has gone from 100% to, you know, very few percent, because you can see Omen has come in and kind of dominated this map right now with his 80%, actually the most picked agent. I was kind of surprised by that, thought it would be Jett, but Jett has seen a big decrease as well. This, I think, honestly, I'm not really sure what to think of this, because I can think of teams like Liquid playing Neon and Optic, went for the Raze, in fact, over the Jett. Those teams have been punished for not picking Jett, I think, quite often, and have lost games on Haven when they don't pick Jett. So I would expect Jett to actually go back up and probably be the most picked agent on this map, like in the actual Reykjavik tournament, unless there's some kind of mad change or whatever. But then big changes for the rest. Sky, you know, is still relatively picked the same, but Breach has come from, you know, relative obscurity, not completely like 0 pick rate or anything, but, you know, relative obscurity. In comes the Breach, particularly on NA, where, you know, there wasn't much Breach before, but now there is a lot more. You can see he's come back in a big way and has eaten into Sova quite a lot. And KO is on here as well, kind of just a bit below these agents. But then we have a 3-way tie for the 5th place, exactly a 3-way tie as well, in terms of the Killjoy, Chamber, and Sova. You can see that, again, teams leaning into the Chamber, again, could be just a facet of, you know, Jett players wanting to play Chamber. I don't really know, but Killjoy seen a bit less than she was before and now has to share this mantle. We have seen teams really go Breach Sova, Sova Sky, Breach KO. You know, there's been a lot of different kind of initiator pairs that we're seeing on this map, and then obviously we have the split between Killjoy and Chamber as well for that Sentinel spot. And now let's come to Icebox, and here on Icebox we still have Sova at 100%. Viper, some teams did actually lean away from Viper somewhat, which was quite interesting. I don't expect that to stay as a long-term thing. I think most teams will continue to pick Viper, and she still has a very high pick rate, as you can see. But then we are seeing some different numbers. I will say about this in particular for the post 4.04 that there weren't many games played on Icebox because obviously of the changes and not many teams feeling comfortable to do so. So actually I think G2 ended up being like more than half of the games. So that's why like Jett is down here on 67% because G2 don't pick Jett on this map, and so they kind of were a big part of deciding what was meta on this map, and so that can probably explain some things. Pre 4.04 it was actually quite interesting. We had these four like dominating on the map, and then you had a bit of a split between some teams picking Killjoy, some teams picking Chamber, some teams picking KO. It was actually very close. I think it was like 0.5% in it for KO winning this 5th spot, so very, very close. But then for the post 4.04, again, we've kind of got these four, which I would expect most teams to run. Chamber has seen obviously a big increase. Again, G2 coming in pretty big for Chamber here in terms of that. But I would expect most teams to pick these four agents and then one of Sage, Omen, or KO as their 5th. I think that that's where most teams will probably go with this. But we'll have to see, I suppose. Sage obviously isn't as necessary now because you don't need her to plant on B like you did before. But I still think it's obviously a pretty good pick. And so some teams have gone for Omen for, you know, the Viper changes, obviously. They want, you know, that bit more control perhaps than Omen's Flash. And Omen's teleports actually can actually get quite a bit of value on this map. So Omen seeing a bit of pick rate. Obviously we see that with the guard on Icebox as well, that they were picking Omen here. But yeah, I think that most teams will probably go with these four plus one of Sage, Omen, or KO. And then finally, we come to Split. And Split, if you aren't aware, is basically the map that no one can agree on. And that has definitely stayed the same for right now. Because, as you can see, Astra, as you might expect, has gone away, but not completely. Some teams are still picking Astra. The mech comp, of course, does pick Astra for them. But Omen has become the dominant controller, but only at 58%. So there is still room for Brim and both Astra to come alive on this map. Obviously, we've seen Liquid pick both Omen and Brim at the same time on this map. So plenty of interesting controller choices from teams as well. Raze, though, is still getting the Raze is good. you have to pick Raze on this map, buff of 9%. But yeah, the second most picked agents are only at 65%, which is really quite low. And Breach has come in big, as you can see. He's come out of relative obscurity, even though I think he was always good on Split, and most teams probably thought the same. They just thought there was probably better options at the time, but not anymore. Breach is coming in, obviously, again, part of that mech comp, but part of a lot of other comps as well. Most teams seemingly like Breach now on Split. And Chamber. Chamber has kind of replaced Cypher, as you can see, the same number here in terms of their pick rate. Again, a lot of teams in NA are picking Chamber on this map, but there are EMEA teams as well. Obviously, it is part of the mech comp, and also I think G2 Mixwell picks Chamber on this map as well. So definitely some Chamber coming in there. And then Sage has actually seen a decrease, which I was a little surprised by, but I think it's because there are just so many agents that are like in like the 20 or 15 to like 30% range on this map. There is an absolute ton of them, from Sky and KO and Brimstone and Astra and Viper and Jet even. Like, there's just a lot of agents that like everyone's trying and, just fitting it around their own team. Like, there's a lot of things going on. Cypher is in there as well, of course, I should have mentioned. So yeah, there's basically just a lot of different team comps, and as I said, you kind of rarely see two similar team comps go up against each other, because everyone kind of has their own ideas of what exactly they want to do on Split, and honestly, it makes Split, most of the time, a pretty fun watch. And so that was the meta by the numbers. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you do enjoy this kind of thing, let me know in the comments down below, but that is all from me, and I will see you next time.